The air in the ballroom was thick with money and lies, the kind of suffocating opulence Flora had escaped a year ago. But Charity demanded attendance. Standing across the room, her ex-husband Preston smirked a predator, spotting weakened prey. He leaned into his new younger companion and whispered a venomous remark just loud enough for the air currents to carry it to Flora's ears. Look at her trying so hard. Pathetic. No one wants my ex-wife. The words were a poisoned dart finding their mark, but as shame and anger warred within her, the quiet, impeccably dressed man who had been her silent companion for the evening, a man whose name she barely knew, leaned down. He didn't say a word. He simply lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so profound, so deliberate, that the entire room seemed to pause. Preston froze, his smug expression shattering like cheap glass. Flora Beaumont felt the familiar chill long before she heard Preston's words. It was the same chill that used to creep over her skin in their $10 million penthouse, a sterile monument to his success and her slow erasure. It was a coldness that had nothing to do with the thermostat, and everything to do with the man who saw her, not as a wife, but as a tastefully chosen accessory, one he had eventually decided to upgrade. The divorce had been finalized for 13 months, 7 days, and roughly 4 hours. Not that she was counting, she was supposed to be free, but freedom she was discovering felt a lot like poverty and obscurity. The generous settlement Preston's lawyers had hammered out was barely enough to cover the rent on her small studio apartment in a less fashionable part of the city, and the lease on a modest workspace where she could finally truly paint. Painting was the one thing that had been entirely hers, a secret garden Preston had occasionally peered into with dismissive amusement. "It's a cute hobby, Jen," he'd say, patting her head. "Keeps you busy." He never understood that the scent of turpentine was her oxygen, that the colors on her palette were her true vocabulary. Tonight she was here at the annual Patrons of Progress charity gala, only because her best friend Bianca Fiore had practically dragged her. Bianca, a fiercely loyal and brutally honest publicist, had insisted it was time for Jen to re-enter society, and more importantly, network with people who actually buy art. So Flora had poured herself into the one designer dress she'd been allowed to keep a deep sapphire silk that matched the sorrow she often felt lingering in her eyes. She'd spent an hour on her makeup trying to paint a mask of serene confidence over the canvas of her exhaustion. The man beside her was a last-minute arrangement by Bianca. "His name is Rhys Donovan," Bianca had whispered, conspiratorially, before pushing them together. "He's a client's associate. Quiet keeps to himself, but he needed a +1. Just look elegant and mysterious. It's better than looking desperate." Rhys Donovan was an enigma. He was tall, with a stillness that was somehow more commanding than the boisterous laughter of the finance bros populating the room. He wore a flawlessly tailored tuxedo, but without the peacocking swagger of men like her ex-husband. His eyes, a deep, thoughtful grey, seemed to absorb everything without judgment. They had spoken little, exchanging pleasantries about the abysmal quality of the canapés and the surprisingly decent string quartet. He didn't pry or posture. He simply existed beside her, a calm, solid presence in a sea of sharks. Then she saw him, Preston Holloway. He was holding court near the cascading champagne fountain, his arm possessively wrapped around the waist of his new fiancée, Tiffany Vandermeer. Tiffany was everything. Flora was not blonde, where she was brunette, bubbly, where she was reserved, and her entire being seemed curated to be the perfect smiling adornment. She looked like she was born to wear the diamond choker that glittered at her throat, a piece Flora recognized as the one Preston had refused to buy her for their 5th anniversary, deeming it a frivolous expense. Preston's eyes met hers across the crowded floor. The smile that touched his lips was not a friendly one. It was a sneer of victory, a cold confirmation of his own superiority. He saw her simple dress, her lack of ostentatious jewelry, her quiet companion, and his gaze dripped with condescending pity. Flora's stomach tightened. She tried to turn away to focus on the conversation Rhys was having about architectural acoustics, but she could feel Preston's stare like a physical weight. She watched as he leaned toward Tiffany, his mouth close to her ear. The distance was too great to hear, but Flora knew the cadence of his cruelty. She had been the recipient of those whispers for years. Whispers about a fellow guest's unfortunate fashion choice, a colleague's business failure, her own weight fluctuations. Then, as a path momentarily cleared between their groups, Preston's voice, a low and carrying baritone, deliberately sliced through the ambient chatter. "Look at her trying so hard. Pathetic. No one wants my ex-wife." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The room, with its glittering chandeliers and laughing faces, receded into a blurry, soundless tunnel. Every insecurity, every fear that had haunted her lonely nights coalesced into a single searing point of shame. He was right. Who was she? A failed wife, a struggling artist no one had heard of, a 34-year-old woman starting over with nothing but paint-stained hands and a broken heart. Tears pricked the back of her eyes, hot and threatening. She willed them back, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. And then it happened. The quiet man beside her, Rhys Donovan, who had seemingly been oblivious, moved with an unnerving grace. He turned slightly, placing himself just a little more in front of her, a subtle shield. He didn't look at Preston. He didn't even look at her face. His gaze fell to her hand, which was clenched into a white-knuckled fist at her side. Gently, he reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm and firm, uncurling her tense fingers. He lifted her hand to his lips, his eyes finally meeting hers over her knuckles. They were filled with an expression she couldn't decipher. Not pity, but something like respect and anger, an anger not directed at her. He pressed a soft, deliberate kiss to the back of her hand. It was an old-world gesture, profoundly intimate and shockingly public. It wasn't a lover's caress. It was a declaration, a silent, damning rebuttal to Preston's venom. A collective intake of breath seemed to ripple through their immediate vicinity. Conversations stuttered and died. All eyes were on them. Flora's gaze flickered past Rhys's shoulder to her ex-husband, Preston Holloway. The man who was never rattled, the master of every room he entered, was frozen solid. His mouth was slightly agape, the smug smirk wiped clean from his face, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from Flora's hand to Rhys's face, a dawning horror spreading across his features. He didn't just see a random man defending his ex-wife. In that moment, he saw someone he was supposed to recognize, and the implications sent a visible tremor through him. The billionaire had kissed her hand, and in doing so, he had just declared war. The ballroom felt like a stage, and a spotlight had just been thrown on Flora. The kiss lingered on her skin, a warm imprint against the icy shock. For a beat, no one moved. Then Rhys released her hand as gently as he had taken it, his expression unreadable. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "I believe the air in here has become rather stale. Shall we—" He didn't wait for a verbal answer, simply placed a light hand on the small of her back and began guiding her toward the grand doors leading to the terrace. The movement broke the spell. A cacophony of whispers erupted in their wake. Flora felt hundreds of eyes on her back, but for the first time she didn't feel their judgment. She felt shielded. As they passed Preston's group, she chanced a glance. Tiffany was staring at her with a newfound, almost fearful respect. Preston looked as though he'd been slapped. His face was a mottled red, his eyes narrowed with a furious confusion. He knew power when he saw it, and the quiet authority with which Rhys Donovan had just acted screamed of a level of influence that dwarfed his own corporate bullying. The cool night air of the terrace was a welcome relief. It overlooked a meticulously landscaped garden, the scent of night-blooming jasmine mixing with the distant sounds of city traffic. "Are you all right, Miss Beaumont?" Rhys asked, his voice, still calm, as if he hadn't just thrown a social grenade into the most exclusive party of the season. I I think so," Flora stammered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "On the contrary," he said, turning to lean against the stone balustrade, his silhouette sharp against the city lights. "Men like your ex-husband operate on the assumption of their victims' silence and shame. Refusing to be silent is not just a choice. It is a necessity." He said victim with such clinical precision, it sent a shiver down her spine. He saw it. He saw the whole dynamic for exactly what it was. "You know him?" She asked the question, tumbling out. "I know of him," Rhys corrected. "Preston Holloway, partner at Sterling Finch and Holloway, known for aggressive acquisitions and leaving a trail of scorched earth. We've circled the same airspace on occasion." The vagueness of his statement hinted at a world of high-stakes business she had only ever glimpsed through the lens of Preston's bragging. "Why?" she asked, more to herself than to him. "Why would you do that for me?" Rhys was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "My late wife was a sculptor," he said, finally, his voice softer, now imbued with a deep, resonant sadness. "She was brilliant, and for years, people, patrons, critics, even her own family, told her work was charming, or a lovely pastime. They never saw the steel in her. They saw a woman with a hobby. I learned too late, perhaps, that the most potent defense of an artist's soul is to afford it the dignity and respect it deserves, especially when it is under attack." Flora was stunned into silence. This wasn't a playboy's gallant gesture. It was something rooted in personal pain, in a profound understanding she never would have expected. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said quietly. He gave a small, sad smile. "Thank you. Her name was Livia. She would have liked you. She had no patience for bullies." They stood in a comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again, his tone shifting back to something more businesslike. "Bianca Fiore mentioned you are a painter." "I am," Flora confirmed, a familiar knot of insecurity tightening in her chest. "She speaks very highly of your work. She called it emotionally raw and technically brilliant. She is not one for idle flattery." Flora flushed. "Bianca is a very good friend. And she also told me you're preparing for a small exhibition at the Co-op Gallery downtown," he continued. "In a few months, yes. It's the first time I'll be showing my new work. The work I've done since—" She trailed off. "Since you left the Gilded Cage?" He finished for her, his perception unnervingly accurate. "May I see it?" The question caught her off guard. "See it?" "Your work. In your studio," he clarified. "I am not merely a connoisseur of architectural acoustics. I am also a collector, and the Donovan Foundation has a vested interest in supporting emerging artists. Artists with steel." The offer hung in the air, glittering with possibility. This wasn't a pity date or a social favor. It was a professional inquiry. From him, Rhys Donovan, a name she was beginning to realize carried a weight she couldn't yet comprehend. It was a lifeline thrown from the most unexpected of quarters. "Of course," she heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. "I would be honored." He handed her a simple, heavy cardstock business card. It bore only his name, a phone number, and an email address. No company, no title. It didn't need one. "My assistant will call you to arrange a time," he said. "Now I think we have provided the gossips with enough material for one evening. I'll have my driver take you home." As she was whisked away in a silent, impossibly luxurious sedan, Flora's mind reeled. She looked back at the Grand Hotel. She could still feel the phantom warmth of his lips on her hand, and the chill of Preston's frozen, furious stare. Her ex-husband had tried to define her as an unwanted object, but in a single quiet gesture, Rhys Donovan had suggested she might just be a priceless work of art. The next morning the call came. Not from an assistant, but from Rhys Donovan himself. He wanted to visit her studio. That afternoon, Flora's studio was her sanctuary and her battlefield. It was a large, drafty space in a converted warehouse district, worlds away from the polished marble and glass of her former life. The air was thick with the smells of linseed oil, oiled turpentine, and brewing coffee. Canvases in various stages of completion leaned against every wall. Drop cloths, stained with a rainbow of colours, covered the floor. It was messy, it was chaotic, and it was the only place she felt completely herself. The news of Rhys Donovan's impending visit sent her into a controlled panic. She didn't tidy up the chaos, was part of her process, but she did put on a clean shirt, wiped the stray paint smudge off her cheek, and made a fresh pot of coffee. She was terrified. What if he saw her work and agreed with Preston? What if it was just a cute hobby, after all? When he arrived precisely at the arranged time, he seemed utterly unfazed by the gritty industrial setting. He wore simple charcoal trousers and a grey cashmere sweater, looking as comfortable here as he had in his tuxedo. "Miss Beaumont," he greeted her with a small nod. "Thank you for accommodating me on such short notice." "Flora, please, and thank you for coming." He didn't engage in small talk. His eyes immediately began to roam the room, taking in the canvases. He moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, like a curator examining a new acquisition. He didn't just glance, he looked. He studied the texture of the paint, the violence of one brushstroke, the quiet sorrow of another. Flora's work since the divorce was a departure from her earlier, more decorative pieces. It was raw, abstract, and deeply personal. One large canvas was a maelstrom of furious reds and blacks, slashed through with a defiant sliver of gold. Another was a study in blues and greys, a suffocating, almost claustrophobic composition that captured the feeling of being trapped. A third, her most recent, was different. It was filled with tentative greens and yellows, the colours of a fragile, hesitant spring. She held her breath watching him. He spent nearly 10 minutes in front of the furious red canvas. His head tilted, his expression unreadable. He moved to the blue one, his hands clasped behind his back. He lingered there, too. Finally, he turned to her. His grey eyes were serious, intense. "This is a narrative of survival," he said. It wasn't a question. Flora felt a lump form in her throat. Yes, I suppose it is." "Anger," he said, gesturing to the red painting. "Desolation." He nodded toward the blue. "And this one?" He walked over to the canvas of hesitant spring. "This is hope, but it's a cautious hope, the kind that has been earned." He understood. He didn't need her to explain it. He saw the story she had bled onto the canvas. For the first time, a genuine, unforced smile touched Flora's lips. "No one has ever gotten it like that before," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "Then they weren't looking properly," he stated simply. "Preston Holloway is a fool, not just for what he said, but for what he was incapable of seeing." He then walked to a smaller piece she had tucked away, almost hidden behind a stack of supplies. It was a self-portrait, but not of her face. It was a painting of her hands, stained with paint clenched around a broken paintbrush that she was painstakingly trying to mend with gold leaf. A nod to the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, making it more beautiful for having been broken. "This one," Rhys said, his voice low. "This one is the masterpiece. May I purchase it?" Flora was flabbergasted. "Purchase it? But it's not even—" "I wasn't going to show it." "It's the most honest piece in the room," he countered. "It's about the process of rebuilding. It's the prologue to all the others. Name your price." She stammered, completely unprepared. I don't know. $5,000? It was more than she'd ever sold a single piece for in her life. Rhys didn't even blink. "My office will wire $25,000 to your account this afternoon. We'll also cover the costs for framing and insuring all the pieces for your upcoming exhibition at the Co-op. Consider it a grant from the Donovan Foundation to ensure you are unencumbered by financial constraints as you prepare. Flora sank onto a nearby stool, her knees weak. 25. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep painting, he said, and say you'll have dinner with me tomorrow night. Not as a collector or a patron, but as a man who enjoys the company of a woman with steel in her soul. The invitation was gentle, devoid of pressure. It was a request, not a demand. It was everything Preston's overtures had never been. Yes, she said, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. I'd like that very much. Meanwhile, across town, Preston Holloway was having a very different kind of day. The gala incident had become the talk of their social circle. He'd spent the morning fielding calls from concerned friends, all fishing for gossip. The question on everyone's lips was the same. Who was the man with Flora Preston's initial shock had morphed into a cold, seething rage? He'd had his top associate, a Weasley man named Jeffrey, spend the entire morning digging. The name Rhys Donovan had at first yielded surprisingly little. He wasn't on the flashy society pages. He didn't flaunt his wealth. But when Jeffrey had cross-referenced the name with global finance and tech sectors, the blood had drained from his face. Rhys Donovan wasn't just rich. He was a ghost, a titan of industry who operated in the stratosphere far above Preston's world. He owned tech patents that powered half the world's smartphones, had controlling interests in renewable energy firms, and his private equity company, Donovan Capital, swallowed other companies for breakfast. He was notoriously private, almost reclusive. For him to make such a public gesture was unheard of. It makes no sense, Preston snarled, pacing his office that overlooked the city. Why her, a penniless artist living in a hovel? What could he possibly want with Flora? Jeffrey shifted nervously. Sir, there's more. I looked into the Donovan Foundation. It's one of the largest private arts endowments in the world. They've launched entire careers. They're kingmakers. The word hung in the air. Kingmaker. The idea of Flora, his meek, pliable Flora, being crowned by anyone was ludicrous. The thought of her succeeding without him thriving because of another man was intolerable. It was a direct challenge to his narrative, to the world he had so carefully constructed, where he was the sun and everyone else were merely planets in his orbit. Find out where her gallery show is, Preston commanded, his voice dangerously low. Find out the name of the gallery owner. I don't care what it takes. This little fairy tale of hers is going to end before it even begins. He would not be humiliated. He would not be upstaged. He would remind Flora and the entire world that nothing he discarded ever became a treasure. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind for Flora. The grant from the Donovan Foundation was a godsend, freeing her from the gnawing anxiety of bills and allowing her to purchase the highest quality canvases and paints. But more than the money, it was the validation that fueled her. Someone saw her. Someone believed in her. Her dinners with Rhys became a regular occurrence. They were never extravagant. They'd find quiet restaurants where they could talk for hours. He spoke of his late wife Livia with a love that was still raw but also beautiful. He described her passion, her frustration with the art world, and her unwavering belief in the power of creation. In turn, Flora found herself opening up about her decade with Preston, not as a litany of complaints, but as an analysis of her own slow awakening. Rhys listened, truly listened, his insightful questions helping her piece together parts of her own story she hadn't fully understood. He never touched her, not beyond a hand on her elbow to guide her, or a brief touch of hands across the table to emphasize a point. The respect he showed her was a balm on wounds she hadn't known were still so deep. It was a slow, gentle courtship of the mind and soul, and she found herself falling not for his wealth, but for the quiet strength of his character. Her art reflected this new chapter. The canvases became brighter, the compositions more daring. The cautious hope in her spring painting began to blossom into a confident summer. Mr. Bertrand Galliano, the owner of the Co-op Gallery, was ecstatic. "Flora, this new work is a revelation," he exclaimed during a visit to her studio. "It has all the raw power of your earlier pieces, but with a new layer of transcendence. The show is going to be a massive success. I've already had several influential critics express keen interest after I sent them a few preliminary images. The opening night was set. Invitations were sent. A small, respected arts journal was planning a feature. For the first time, Flora felt the solid ground of a future she was building for herself. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the storm gathering on the horizon. Preston, true to his word, had been busy. Through his network of corporate spies and legal intimidation, he had zeroed in on the Co-op Gallery and its owner, Galliano. The Co-op was a passion project for Galliano, a respected but financially vulnerable institution that survived on grants and the goodwill of its patrons. It was a soft target. Preston didn't make a direct facet threat. He was too clever for that. He began to move his pieces on the board with chilling precision. First, a major corporate sponsor of the gallery, a bank where Preston's firm held significant sway, suddenly announced they were re-evaluating their philanthropic commitments and pulled their annual funding, citing vague economic pressures. It was a huge blow to the gallery's operating budget. Next, the building that housed the gallery was suddenly slapped with a series of surprise code violations from the city minor, bureaucratic infractions that had been overlooked for years, but were now being enforced with draconian zeal, demanding expensive and immediate repairs. Mr. Galliano was baffled and overwhelmed. The final move was the most insidious. Preston used a shell corporation to approach Mr. Galliano with an offer he couldn't refuse. The offer was to buy the gallery's most valuable asset, the long-term lease on its prime downtown location. The Shell Corp offered to pay 3 times its market value, an astronomical sum that would solve all of Galliano's newfound financial woes and set him up for a comfortable retirement. The only condition was that the sale had to be immediate, and the new owners would be terminating the gallery's lease to convert the space into a luxury retail store. All upcoming exhibitions, including Flora's, would be cancelled. Mr. Galliano was tormented. He loved his gallery, he believed in his artists, but he was being squeezed from all sides. He was an art lover, not a brawler. He didn't see the coordinated attack. He only saw a string of terrible luck and an unexpected, glittering lifeboat. The night before she was due to hang her paintings, Flora received a call. It was a distraught Mr. Galliano. "Flora, my dear, I have terrible, terrible news," he began, his voice cracking. "There's been a development. The gallery, I've had to sell the lease. The show, it's cancelled." The phone felt slick in Flora's hand. "Cancelled? What are you talking about? It's tomorrow. I am so sorry. I had no choice. The finances, the building violations. It was impossible," he stammered, clearly ashamed. "The new owners are shutting it down, effective immediately." Flora's blood ran cold. This wasn't bad luck. A pulled sponsorship, surprise violations, and a buyout offer, too good to be true, all happening within weeks of her show. It was a targeted demolition. It had Preston's fingerprints all over it. The elation of the past months evaporated, replaced by a familiar, sickening dread. He had found a way to get to her, to smash her dreams, just as they were about to be realized. He was proving his point. Anything he threw away would turn to dust. Tears of rage and frustration streamed down her face. She hung up the phone and hurled a paint-stained rag across the studio. It hit a canvas with a pathetic splat. She was back in the cage, the bars forged not of steel this time, but of her ex-husband's vindictive, far-reaching power. She sank to the floor, surrounded by the beautiful, hopeful art that was now homeless. She felt small, foolish, and utterly defeated. After allowing herself 10 minutes to cry, she took a shaky breath. The old Flora would have accepted this, would have crawled into bed and let the defeat wash over her. But the woman who had stared into Rhys Donovan's respectful eyes, the woman who had painted her own resilience in gold leaf, was not going to break. Her hand trembled as she picked up her phone. She scrolled to his name. She had wanted to succeed on her own, to prove she didn't need a powerful man to save her. But this wasn't about being saved. This was about fighting a war she couldn't win alone. This was an attack on both of them. She pressed the call button. "Rhys," she said, her voice hoarse but steady when he answered. "It's Flora. We have a problem. I think Preston just tried to ruin me." The silence on the other end of the line was short, but heavy with unspoken fury. When Rhys spoke, his voice was dangerously calm, a low-frequency hum that promised retribution. "Tell me everything, Flora. Don't leave out a single detail." She recounted the entire story from Mr. Galliano's panicked call to her own chilling realization of Preston's orchestration. As she spoke, she could almost picture Rhys on the other end, his grey eyes turning to slate, his mind piecing together the corporate maneuvering with a speed and clarity she couldn't possess. "A shell corporation buying the lease," he mused when she finished. "Aggressive but sloppy. He's letting his anger make him predictable. Stay where you are. I'm sending someone for you. We'll meet at my office." Less than 20 minutes later, a black car, even more discreet and luxurious than the first one, was waiting for her. She was driven not to a flashy skyscraper, but to an unassuming and elegant brownstone in a historic district. Inside, the decor was a testament to quiet power, modern art, including, she noticed with a jolt, her own kintsugi hands painting beautifully framed and lit in a place of honor, rich mahogany and cutting-edge technology seamlessly integrated into the classic architecture. Rhys was waiting for her in his study, a room lined with books from floor to ceiling. He wasn't on the phone barking orders. He was standing by the window, looking out at the private garden, a single file folder on the large desk in front of him. He turned as she entered, and the cold anger in his eyes was startling. "He will regret this," Rhys said, not as a boast, but as a statement of fact. "He has mistaken a personal vendetta for a sound business strategy, and he has done so within my sphere of interest. That is a fatal error." He gestured for her to sit, then opened the folder on his desk. "Preston Holloway has made a career of hostile takeovers. He uses legal loopholes and financial pressure to break smaller companies, then sells them off for parts. It's a vulture's business model. I know this because 5 years ago his firm, Sterling Finch and Holloway, attempted to do the same to a small but innovative biotech firm I had provided seed funding for. They failed. I made sure of it." This was the connection. This wasn't just about her. Preston had crossed Rhys long before that night at the gala. Flora was now the unfortunate battlefield for a pre-existing war. "What he's done to your gallery," Rhys continued, his voice precise, "is a miniature version of his standard playbook. He identified the asset, your success. He identified the vulnerabilities of your partner, Mr. Galliano's finances, and he applied pressure from multiple angles to force a sale. What he doesn't know is who he's up against." He picked up his phone and pressed a single button. "Catherine," he said into the receiver, "initiate the Donovan directive. Target the Shell Corporation, Viridian Properties, LLC. I want its parent company, its funding sources, and its beneficial owners identified. I want to know every transaction it has made in the last 48 hours. And get me everything you have on Sterling Finch and Holloway's current leveraged positions. I want a full vulnerability report. You have 1 hour." He hung up. The efficiency was breathtaking. "What's the Donovan directive?" Flora asked, feeling like she'd just walked onto the set of a spy thriller. A rare, thin smile touched Rhys's lips. "Let's call it my foundation's way of dealing with bullies. We have a very talented team of forensic accountants and researchers. They typically ensure our philanthropic investments are sound, but they are also very good at untangling complicated knots." He then turned his full attention to her. But this is not just my fight, it's yours. He did this to hurt you. So the solution should not just be about stopping him, but about elevating you. Cancelling the show is not an option. We're going to move it. Move it, Rhys. It's tomorrow night. I own a building on 57th Street, he said, as if discussing the weather. The ground floor is a vacant retail space currently between tenants. It has 20-foot ceilings, excellent lighting, and more foot traffic in an hour than the co-op gets in a month. My team can have it transformed into a world-class gallery space by tomorrow afternoon. Flora's mind struggled to keep up. But the invitations, the press... Bianca is a miracle worker, is she not? He asked, with a knowing look. I'm sure she would relish the challenge of announcing a last-minute venue change to a more prestigious location, hinting at a major new patron. The mystique alone will double the attendance. As for the press, he tapped his desk. The arts editor of the New York Times owes me a favor. I believe she will be very interested in the story of an artist who was the target of a vicious corporate sabotage plot, only to be rescued and championed by the Donovan Foundation. He was turning Preston's attack into the single greatest PR opportunity of her life. He wasn't just deflecting the blow, he was using its momentum to launch her into the stratosphere. He wanted to make you invisible, Rhys, said, his voice softening as he looked at her. Instead, we are going to make you inescapable. Just then, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Ah, that was fast. He read the screen, a look of cold satisfaction on his face. Viridian Properties, LLC, as I suspected, a disposable entity funded by a blind trust, which is in turn funded by a Cayman Islands account. However, the initial seed money transfer was sloppy. It came from a discretionary bonus account belonging to Preston Holloway. He had him, clean. He's over-leveraged personally on a deal to short a tech company. Rhys continued scrolling through the information on his phone. A very risky, very arrogant bet. If that company's stock were to, say, receive a sudden massive infusion of capital from an unexpected investor driving the price up instead of down, well, it would be financially catastrophic for anyone betting against it. Flora stared at him, at this quiet, thoughtful man who wielded power with the precision of a surgeon. He wasn't just going to save her show, he was going to systematically dismantle the man who had tried to destroy her. What do you want to do, Flora? Rhys asked, his eyes locking with hers. I can handle this quietly. Make him back off. Or we can proceed with the show and let him walk into the trap. The choice is yours. The old Flora would have wanted it to just go away, but she looked at the painting of her own hands on his wall, the hands that were made more beautiful for having been broken and repaired. Let's have a party, she said, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. Let him come. The next 36 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. A fleet of professionals dispatched by Rhys descended upon the vacant space on 57th Street. Walls were painted, gallery lighting was installed, and a temporary sound system was discreetly hidden. Her paintings were collected from her studio by fine art handlers and hung with curatorial precision. By the evening of the show, the cavernous space had been transformed into a gallery that rivaled any in Chelsea. Bianca Fiore, fueled by righteous fury and an endless supply of espresso, was in her element. She blasted out a press release and a social media blitz that was a work of art in itself. It spoke of a last-minute venue upgrade to a secret exclusive location, hinted at a major new force in art patronage, and framed the event as the most talked-about, must-attend opening of the year. The original invitations were now coveted tickets to an even more exclusive affair. The RSVP list swelled with names that made Flora's head spin: critics collectors, celebrities, and art world power brokers. Flora herself felt strangely calm amidst the storm. She walked through the new gallery space, seeing her work, her story displayed so beautifully under the brilliant lights. Her journey from rage to desolation to hope was laid bare for the world to see. This was her truth. Whatever happened, she had created this. She chose to wear a simple, elegant black dress, allowing the art to be the star of the show. Rhys stood with her as the first guests arrived, a quiet, reassuring presence at her side. He introduced her to influential people, not as his plus one, but as the artist Flora Beaumont. His voice filled with pride. The room buzzed with energy. People weren't just looking at the paintings, they were consuming them. She heard snippets of conversation, astonishing depth, a powerful new voice, completely fearless. Red dots indicating a sale began to appear beside the paintings with startling frequency. Mr. Galliano was there, looking dazed and overjoyed, having been personally invited by Rhys, who had also quietly assured him that a consortium of anonymous art lovers was being formed to secure the co-op gallery's future. Then, through the glass doors, she saw him. Preston Holloway arrived with Tiffany Vandermeer on his arm. He clearly hadn't gotten the memo about his plan's failure. He wore a look of supreme confidence, a conqueror arriving to survey the ruins of his enemy. He expected to find a cancelled event, a locked door, perhaps a weeping Flora. Instead, he walked into a brightly lit, packed gallery, the sound of champagne corks popping, an excited chatter filling the air. He stopped dead in his tracks, his smug expression melting into utter disbelief. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the A-list crowd, the professional setup, and Flora standing radiant and poised at the center of it all. He saw her, and his face contorted into a mask of pure fury. This was impossible. He had crushed her. He had won. And yet here she was, thriving more than ever before. Ignoring Tiffany, he began to stride toward Flora, a man on a collision course. The crowd parted slightly, sensing the impending drama. Rhys put a steadying hand on Flora's arm, but she gave a small shake of her head. This was her fight. "What is this?" Preston hissed as he reached her, his voice a low snarl. "How did you do this?" "Hello, Preston," Flora said, her voice cool and even. "Welcome to my show. I'm so glad you could make it." "You were finished," he spat, his eyes darting around wildly. "The gallery was closed. I made sure of it." It was a confession blurted out in his rage. "Plans change," Flora said simply. "It turns out my work has found a more discerning benefactor." Preston's gaze finally landed on Rhys, who was watching him with an expression of profound disinterest, like a biologist observing a particularly unpleasant insect. Preston's face went white as the final pieces clicked into place. "You..." He breathed, a new kind of fear creeping into his eyes. "Donovan, this was you." "Mr. Holloway," Rhys said, his voice polite but edged with ice. "You are trespassing in a private building at a private event to which you were not invited. I suggest you leave." But Preston was too far gone, his narcissism wounded beyond repair. He turned back to Flora, his face ugly with scorn. "So this is it. You left me for a bigger wallet. How pathetic. You're nothing without a man to pay your way. You're a leech, Flora. You always have been." This was it. The final desperate attempt to diminish her, to strip her of her own agency. But the words had lost their power. She was no longer the woman who would absorb his poison. And this was the moment for the final unexpected twist. It wasn't about Rhys's money or power. It was about a secret Flora had kept for years. "A leech, Preston," she said, her voice ringing with newfound clarity and strength, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "That's an interesting choice of words. I was just remembering something from our marriage. All those late nights you spent working on the Langford merger. Do you remember that?" Preston's eyes widened slightly. "What are you talking about? I remember you coming home so proud." Flora continued, her voice growing stronger. "You told me how you'd found a loophole, a way to use insider information from a friend at a rival firm to structure the deal. You called it brilliant. I didn't understand the details then, I just packed it away like so many other things I didn't want to see." But I never forgot the name of your friend. A Mr. Peterson, wasn't it? Preston looked as though she had physically struck him. Insider trading. It was the cardinal sin of his profession, a career-ending, potentially jail-time-worthy crime. He had confessed it to her in a moment of hubris, never imagining his artist wife was listening, let alone that she would ever remember or understand. "You're lying," he choked out, but the sweat beading on his forehead told a different story. "Am I?" Flora countered. She looked past him to a man standing near the entrance, a man who had gone unnoticed until now. Bianca's firm happens to represent a journalist who specializes in financial crimes. He's been looking into some of your firm's more creative accounting for a while now. I believe he'll find Mr. Peterson's name very interesting. It was the final devastating blow. It wasn't Rhys's power that had undone him. It was his own arrogance. It was the ghost of his own crime brought to light by the woman he had dismissed as insignificant. Preston Holloway stood there exposed and utterly defeated, not by a billionaire's wealth, but by his ex-wife's memory. He stared at her, at this strong, formidable woman she had become, and for the first time he looked truly afraid. Without another word, he turned and fled, leaving Tiffany standing alone and bewildered in his wake. A hush fell over the room, followed by a ripple of applause. Flora had not only survived, she had triumphed on her own terms using her own strength. Rhys looked at her, and the pride in his eyes was overwhelming. He took her hand, the same one he had kissed at the gala, and this time he didn't just kiss her knuckles. He brought it to his heart and simply held it there. In front of everyone, he was no longer just her patron. He was her partner. The aftermath of the gallery opening was swift and decisive. The journalist, armed with the name Flora had provided, broke a story that sent shockwaves through the financial world. An official investigation was launched into the Langford merger and other questionable deals at Sterling Finch and Holloway. Preston was forced to resign in disgrace, his reputation shattered. The risky short-selling bet he had made collapsed spectacularly as Rhys, through an anonymous subsidiary, invested heavily in the targeted tech company, turning Preston's gamble into a personal financial apocalypse. He lost his fortune, his career, and his fiancée, Tiffany, who wasted no time in distancing herself from the scandal. Preston Holloway, the man who believed he was the center of the universe, had become a pariah. He had tried to snuff out Flora's small candle and had ended up burning down his own empire. Flora, by contrast, became a star. The story of the sabotage and her triumphant last-minute show was irresistible to the media. She was hailed not just as a talented artist, but as a symbol of resilience. Her exhibition was extended twice due to popular demand, and every single piece sold many to prestigious international collectors Rhys had discreetly invited. Museums began making inquiries. Critics lauded her as the voice of a new, unapologetic female expressionism. She was no longer Preston's ex-wife. She was Flora Beaumont, the artist. Her life found a new, beautiful rhythm. She bought the warehouse that housed her studio, ensuring it would always be her sanctuary. She worked not with the frantic desperation of before, but with the calm, focused joy of an artist who knew her worth. Her relationship with Rhys deepened, growing far beyond the dramatic circumstances that had brought them together. They built their connection in the quiet moments, cooking dinner together in her messy studio kitchen, walking hand in hand through art museums on Sunday afternoons, and spending long, lazy weekends at his secluded lakeside home, where she would paint and he would read content in their shared silence. He never tried to change her or direct her. He was the ultimate patron, not just of her art, but of her spirit. He celebrated her successes as if they were his own and provided a safe harbor for her doubts. He loved her for the steel he had first recognized, but also for the fragile, hopeful colors she was now painting into her life. One evening, about a year after her show, they were sitting on the terrace of his city brownstone, the same spot where he had first told her about his late wife. The city lights twinkled below them. I was thinking about that first night at the gala, Flora said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. I was so broken. I believed what he said was true. He was projecting, Rhys said, wrapping his arm around her. His own fear of being unwanted, of being insignificant without his money and power. He tried to force that fear onto you. And you, she said, looking up at him. You saw something else. I saw the truth. He replied, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. I saw a woman who was painting her way out of the darkness. I saw an artist whose hands were made of gold, even if she didn't know it yet. He leaned in and kissed her a kiss that held none of the drama of their first encounters, but all the depth of the love that had grown between them. It was a kiss of partnership, of respect, and of a shared future. Flora Beaumont had once been an accessory in a gilded cage. She had been told she was worthless, discarded, and unwanted. But she had learned that true value isn't bestowed by others. It's forged in the fires of your own survival. Her life was now her own masterpiece, a vibrant symphony of color and light made all the more beautiful for the dark canvases that had come before. And she was just getting started. And so Flora's story isn't just about escaping a toxic past or finding a billionaire prince. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by those who try to diminish us. It's about the moment we stop listening to the whispers of doubt and start listening to the strength within our own souls. Flora's triumph wasn't when Rhys Donovan kissed her hand. It was when she realized her own hands were capable of rebuilding her world more beautiful and resilient than before. Her victory wasn't just in exposing Preston's crimes, but in reclaiming her own narrative and painting a future he could never have imagined for her. If Flora's journey from heartbreak to empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of overcoming the odds and finding incredible strength in the ashes of the past. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.